hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken.
Hi, welcome to Reveal, Connect and Heal. I'm the host, Deb Maybury, and I'm here today with Alok Mukherjee, and he is the chair of the Toronto Police Services Board.
That's right.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today.
My pleasure.
Now, those of you who normally watch Reveal, Connect and Heal, you know I never use cheat notes, but I have some questions today that I don't want to forget, so I've prepared some.
I'll do my best to answer.
Yeah, great. My greatest interest in the area of sexual abuse has to do with healing. When people have been hiding in secret for years and years and they come forward. And we know that often that involves wanting to possibly charge the person that offended them years ago. And I'm wondering what type of training police officers get in terms of maybe sensitivity training or dealing with these situations.
That's a very important question. There was a time when the police were not provided with good training. And then when we did start giving training, there were some issues with it. The board, about 10 years ago, established a committee, sexual assault committee, where we involved some people who were survivors, who were experts, to assist us in looking at the training we were providing. And they identified a lot of difficulty or problems with what we were giving by way of training. It used to be a 1-week training, half of which was training on dealing with historical sexual assault that people have brought to the light of the police years after it had happened, typically during their childhood. And they had suppressed the memory. Now they were trying to heal themselves by coming to terms with it.
So it could have been something from 30 years ago when people were coming
Could have
forward.
been something from 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And the other half was to deal with adult sexual assault now, current events. And what we found was that the first module in the training had to do with false memory syndrome. So we had problem both with the duration of the training. We didn't believe that a 1-week training on 2 such important areas of sexual assault investigation was sufficient. And second, we had real trouble with the idea that the officers were starting with a module on false memory syndrome.
Of course, because you're almost putting it out there that people are making it up, so they start with a different perception. Right?
So with the help of people who were on that committee, we revised the entire training. And now the training is double the time. And there's 2 separate components. One training to deal with historical sexual assault, the other with current sexual assault. And the module on false memory syndrome is completely gone from the training.
That's probably a good idea.
Right. So that's the one change that we made. The second was to augment our sexual assault unit. There is a central unit which includes people who are highly trained and very, very sensitive. So that as opposed to sexual assaults being investigated always by people in the divisions, the sexual assault unit, that is the central unit, plays a significant role to make sure that the investigations are competent, are sensitive, are conducted by people who have a high degree of empathy with people who come forward. It's very courageous of them to come forward and to bring to light events that may have happened a long time ago. And we understood that we have a responsibility and obligation to make sure they are satisfied that their complaint has been taken seriously. They have been dealt with by people who understand what it is like to be in the position in which they find themselves, and they are fully supported. That Central Sexual Assault Unit has an advisory committee made up of people from the community, from various professions that deal with sexual assault. So they are constantly able to get advice to do better. So I think those are two components that I want to put out on the efforts we have made to make sure that people who come forward and bring to light long-hidden incidents feel that they are being heard and they are being taken seriously, they are being treated with empathy, and they are being supported.
That's good to know that the training is being increased. What's the probability somebody who comes forward after a number of years, what's the probability that something is, in terms of somebody being charged? Because I know 3 people in the last year that have actually come forward, had the courage, allowed themselves to be vulnerable, and then they've received the same information. And one had pretty significant information as far as I'm concerned. What's the probability that people are actually going to see somebody charged with something that happened years ago?
Depends on the investigation, but our investigators, people in the sexual assault unit, are very determined that if they are able to gather the type of evidence that is needed to lay charges, the charges will be laid. It's an area where there's a high degree of sensitivity, and they'll do their best to bring to trial somebody against whom they do have solid evidence. Now, it's not easy to gather that evidence. In fact, one of our concerns is that not enough people may be coming forward, because we want to, our concern is that only a fraction of the people who have undergone this kind of a traumatic incident are able to come forward. So we see only the tip of the iceberg.
Barely the tip of the iceberg,
Right.
but it's coming. I think
Right.
things are changing.
And we want to make sure that those who have the courage to come forward feel or are satisfied that they've got the maximum level of effort on the part of the police. Because our hope is that as community sees that police is taking this matter seriously and dealing with it with the greatest degree of seriousness, that more people will feel confident about coming forward.
And what type of evidence are you looking for?
Well, this is a criminal offense, and the standard for conviction is very high. Now, it's not for the police, it's for the Crown, for the prosecutor to make the case. But our obligation and responsibility is to provide them with the best possible evidence. Now, in criminal trials, the judge has to be satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that the crime that's being alleged did occur in order for there to be conviction. So the police have to do their best to get the evidence that will satisfy the judge beyond reasonable doubt.
When I was doing some research to find out more about you, your name came up in things like anti-victimization and gun control, gun laws. And these are very heated debates that go on. And it struck me that sexual abuse affects way more people. And yet we hear about it a lot less, though it's growing. It's a movement that is growing. And I'm wondering if there's something being put in place to prepare for the number of people that will come forward, as people like our pitcher here in Toronto, Dickie, I can't remember his first name, he's coming forward, other celebrities are coming forward. and more people are talking. And, you know, I'm just thinking, is there some preparation that's being done?
Well, I mentioned earlier that there was a time when we were not that good. In fact, you'll remember the famous case of Jane Doe. And when the police knew that there was a predator in a neighborhood, the police concealed that information, did not advise the community to be careful. And there's some suggestion that they may even have used the community as a bait, because Jane Doe was victimized as a result, and she sued the police, and she won against Toronto police. What the city did was to request the Auditor General to do a comprehensive audit of how Toronto police was handling sexual assault. And the Auditor General, Jeff Griffiths, provided an extensive set of recommendations on what we needed to do to do better. And then he did a follow-up audit and identified a number of areas where his recommendations had not been implemented. So when I came on board 10 years ago, there were still recommendations from the Auditor General that were pending from 1999.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And the police service had been telling the board that they had implemented every single recommendation when they had not. So that's when we made a commitment that we'll implement each one of those recommendations, which Mr. Griffiths had developed after widespread consultation in the community, after speaking to many people, both victims and experts who deal with sexual assault. And that's when we formed the Sexual Assault Committee to work with the community and with the police service to make sure that all of those recommendations were implemented. And we invested resources, both augmenting the training, as well something as simple as building interview rooms in different police stations, because we had pretty unfriendly hold in the interview rooms, which did not necessarily inspire victims to feel safe and feel comfortable talking to police investigators. So we invested some money and built new rooms that are more sensitive to the condition in which they are. So now anybody who comes forward with these situations is interviewed in one of those rooms with investigators who are highly competent. I'll tell you, for example, we ran into a situation where a woman came forward with allegations of some things that had happened to her when she was a child. Now the memories were coming back. And she was interviewed by two big, muscular police officers when she had specifically said that she wanted to be interviewed by women police officers, that she felt claustrophobic in small windowless rooms, and she did not want people to be crowding her in. And all her requests were ignored on the basis that nobody else was available. These were the only two who were available. And they did the investigation or the interview in a way where she felt as if her credibility was being questioned. And the officers took a very narrow view that she made some statements which were not consistent with what she had said before. She was contradicting herself. She was bringing out new information as though they were afterthoughts, and they came to the conclusion that she would not be a credible witness. And she filed a complaint, which I had to deal with. And it became a learning opportunity for us, that she was not the guilty party. She had shown tremendous bravery in coming forward, and we did not create the conditions for her to be able to speak to the officers in the way that she wanted to. And if there were contradictions, or if she was bringing out information piecemeal, there was a reason for it. She was not given the environment that she had requested. So we learned from that. That would never happen again. She would now be taken to one of these better designed facilities where she would be interviewed by people, not only the type of people she may request, but also people who have had special training to do that.
Well, I think that's a big concern with a lot of people when they consider coming forward, whether it's something that happened years ago or just happened last night,
Yes.
is re-victimization.
That's right. And I think we have become very, very conscious of that.
When somebody comes forward and they want to, divulge what happened to them, what type of a reception would they receive? Like, where would they go? Do they just walk into any police station? Or?
They can walk into any police station because they are bringing forward what is potentially a criminal offense. So the initial intake will be done by whichever police station they go to. But then they'll make an assessment. And there are very strict criteria which will be applied to determine whether this is something where the sexual assault unit needs to be brought in, and they'll be notified immediately. And if the interview, the initial conversation is done by somebody at the division, at the police station, the sexual assault unit will guide them and work with them to make sure they do it right. But chances are that they will take it over themselves and do the investigation. But to go back to your question, people can go into any police station to file a complaint.
Right, so it doesn't have to be in the area that it would have happened, or the current residents?
No, wherever they live. And if they want to go to the nearest police station, they can do that. But every police station has the same guidelines, the same criteria, and the same process.
I read something that, I think it was in the Star, and somebody described your leadership style as loudness in favor of politeness, courtesy, patience, reasonableness, combined with determination and being goal-oriented. And it really stood out. I thought that was great. For people that are the sexual abuse, the advocates, how can they use your style to promote change and to emphasize the need for acknowledgement?
I think certainly here in Toronto Police Service, there is an openness and an understanding of how serious this is and how widespread. So people can come forward and ask for a conversation if that's what they wish to have, and there will be people who will be willing to engage with them. If there are serious concerns, one of the things we do is we invite members of the public to come and address the board. The board meets in public every month, and we encourage, welcome people who wish to speak to the board. So if there are large policy issues or deficiencies that they notice which they would like to be fixed, they can come and speak to the board. That's one thing. they can certainly, if they are feeling angry enough that they wish to file a complaint, they can file a complaint through the OIPRD, Ontario Independent Police Review Director. It may be a conduct-related complaint, it may be a policy-related complaint, it may be a complaint related to quality of service, and those will be taken seriously. They can simply write to me or the chief of police, and that will be taken seriously.
Any complaints that you have?
Yeah, I mean, by law, we cannot investigate a complaint. All complaints have to go to the Independent Police Review Director, who decides what type of a complaint it is and who is to do the investigation. But every complaint will be looked at. But if it's a systemic issue, and they were to address the board and say, board, there is a huge gap here, or there is some things you need to fix, we would look at that.
Yes, that's good to know, because we often, as citizens, complain that there isn't an avenue to have a voice,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
I guess it's where we don't know where to look in
Yes.
order to have a
Yeah.
voice.
No, any letter that comes in here is taken quite seriously. So in terms of style, I mean, all I'm saying is, before people feel frustrated that they have to scream and shout, I think initiating an engagement is a good first step. If they are rebuffed or if they're not satisfied, then we'll be inviting people to scream at us.
That's great. What's your greatest challenge in this area, or not necessarily you, but what's a police officer's greatest challenge when working in this area?
I think the greatest challenge in this particular area is to be able to find the type of evidence that will lead to a prosecution. Because typically these are often incidents that happen without the presence of witnesses, in the privacy of a room or space or whatever. And so there are rarely eyewitnesses. And if it is something that's reported immediately, there are physical pieces of evidence, clothing, marks, things like that. But if it is a historical one, there is hardly any physical evidence. So the greatest challenge is to be able to be really creative and find the types of indirect evidence so far removed from in time that would stand up and make a case beyond reasonable doubt. I would say that that's the biggest challenge.
Thank you for sharing. It must be terribly frustrating for police officers when they know, so somebody's guilty. So for example, you have a situation that's happening right now, maybe with a child or an adolescent, and it's, you know, but you can't prove, and then that person is put back into the home.
That is hugely frustrating. And I've heard police officers say, we knew who did it, but we just couldn't get the evidence to prove it. And so for children, for example, we have built a relationship with the Gatehouse where we provided some resources to create interview rooms where children can come and speak to police officers in a very hospitable environment, highly supported, friendly, in the hope that that would allow children to disclose information that they may not feel comfortable doing elsewhere. And I think the idea of using a community resource like that was a very good one, because it increases the chances of success in prosecuting the culprit.
Well, Well, I like the idea too, because if it's videotaped, so something's happened to a child currently now, they're 6 years old, but by the time the investigation moves forward, it gets into the courts, it could be 4 years later or more, and so to see the child at that time,
That's right.
that must be very beneficial.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What could you share to the people that are watching this? A lot of the times they've been victimized. What would you share in terms of, from your experience and what you've seen, and the way the officers are dealing with people, in terms of healing? How can people move forward with their healing? A lot of the times they know there are perpetrators out there, their offender is out there, maybe it's a family member. How do they go forward and heal when they're kind of still living with the situation?
I think, what we have been talking about, the ability to come forward and give the police the information which they can use to take action. But that's not enough. Along with that, also building support, so that they don't feel that they're suffering in silence and alone. That we do have in our community, in the city, supports available in the community that are available to people, to make use of them, to not keep it all within themselves. They must have intimate others with whom they can share, because quite often there has been a problem that they did not share what happened with anybody. So later on, there is no one else to corroborate, to say, yes, such and such came and talked to me. So come to the police, make use of support systems that are available in the community, and don't think that you're alone and meant to suffer in silence. Those are some things I would say people need to do. Last year I wrote an article, there's an agency in Jane Finch area, put together a selection of writings on sexual assault. And there again I made this point that we may not be able to change the way people are, but those who engage in this extremely heinous type of behavior need to be brought to justice. And the system we have for doing that is the police and the courts. And I'd like to see the police doing their maximum best in this area. They can only do that when people come forward and expect of them to do their maximum best.
Thank you. That's some really great advice. I appreciate you sharing that today.
I believe in that.
That's great. Any last comments that you'd like to make?
No, I think that's the one. I look at other, point you made about this being a very widespread crime. I call it crime. And it's not only here, but globally.
Yes.
Across south of the border, the incidence is very high. In India, I'm sure read about what happened to the young woman on the streets of Delhi. That's not the only one. There are incidents of children who are not even in their teens being violated. We cannot pretend that we are much better than those places. A great deal of this crime is hidden. People suffer in silence. we as a society need to do all we can to stop that from happening, so that people do come forward, so that police do engage in serious investigation. We will not be able to change people's minds and hearts or behavior, but we certainly need to bring to justice those who engage in this crime.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me this afternoon.
Anything we can do.
Lots of very good information. It was nice to be with you again. Thank you so much. I'm Deb Maybury, and you've been listening to Reveal, Connect, and Heal.
There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. Ooh, beyond your broken